You always had an eye for things that glitter, but I was far from being made of gold. I don't know how, but I scraped up the money. I just never could quite tell you no. Just like when you were leaving Amarillo, take that new job in Tennessee. And I quit mine so we could be together. I can't forget the way you looked at me. Just to see you smile, I'd do anything that you wanted me to. When all is said and done, I never count the cost. It's worth all that's lost, just to see you smile. When you said time was all you really needed, I walked away and let you have your space. All leaving didn't hurt me near as badly as the tears I saw rolling down your face. And yesterday I knew just what you wanted.
Good afternoon. Our program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats and silence your cell phones.
I was just thinking that. I was like, good timing.
Welcome to the Keynote Lunch, sponsored by MDA. Please welcome Satellite Executive Chairman Jeffrey Hill.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Satellite's 2023 Opening Day Keynote Luncheon. Thank you all so much for making the trip with us this week in Washington, D.C. I hope you enjoyed this morning's conference sessions, and that you continue to enjoy your experience with us throughout this very busy and exciting week. Today's luncheon keynote program is generously supported by MDA, a space technology company headquartered in Brampton, Ontario, Canada, with a rich 50-year history providing geointelligence, robotics, and space operations and satellite systems to the global space community. We are honored to have MDA CEO Mike Greenlee kick off today's luncheon keynote program with opening remarks. He has more than 25 years of experience in the defense and security business, serves as Vice Chair of the Space Canada, has been recognized for his business and community leadership as an Ottawa Top 40 Under 40 business leader, a Profit 100 CEO for leading one of Canada's fastest growing companies for 3 years running, and is a recipient of Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee Medal for service to peers and country in the defense sector. Before we welcome Mike Greenlee to the stage for remarks, please enjoy this video from MDA.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Greenlee, CEO of MDA. Hope you enjoyed that video. I just had post-traumatic stress disorder. When we took the company public 2 years ago, they used to play that video like 6 times a day. I just had all these flashbacks. I just wanted to take a few minutes just to say hi, talk a little bit about MDA's views of the space business, the space market, growth, and commercialization as we see it today. For those of you that don't know, MDA is a 50-plus-year-old space company headquartered in Canada, serving the world. 3 business areas that we're aligned around. Geointelligence, all about synthetic aperture radar satellites, owning and operating them, and delivering geointelligence data and information products to customers around the world, using our data and the data from our partners. Busily investing in Chorus these days, our next generation Earth observation satellite constellation. Robotics and space operations is all about sensors and robotic systems, the Canadarm series of projects, Canadarm on Space Shuttle, Canadarm2 on the International Space Station the last 20 plus years, and now busily working on Canadarm3, next generation artificial intelligence robotic systems for Lunar Gateway, the new space station that will orbit the moon. And lastly, satellite systems. Our very busy satellite systems team in Montreal, Quebec, up in Canada, which is the primary activity for us at this particular conference or show, in its 60th year of delivering satellite communications technologies into the market in all orbits, experiencing tremendous growth as we deliver our next generation, primarily LEO constellation growth these days, serving customers around the world. All of this growth is driving tremendous activity in the company. We've hired 1,500 people in the last 18 months. Currently have about 600 job openings for those that might need something new to do. I'll throw that out there. As we continue to expand in the space market. I just want to take a few minutes to talk about what we're seeing in terms of growth in the space market, sort of as we see it and as it affects us in our businesses. The first area to talk about really is just the nature of market expansion, the way we're experiencing and visualizing it. We all talk about the growth in the space market and the numbers behind it. We talk about a $400 billion market today that's going to advance to, U.S. Chamber of Commerce numbers, $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion by 2040. Nice steady growth as we go through the next 20 years. We're experiencing that. We're feeling that. Lately, I've had the opportunity to work on a bunch of activity about how China views the space market. And I find it really interesting that when you read all of their literature and the literature about the Earth to Moon economic zone, I like that term, the Earth to Moon economic zone, and how that they value that as a $10 trillion market in 2050. I think it's really interesting that we're all busy working away and we're investing and we're positioning ourselves for a $1 trillion to $1.5 trillion market in 2040, when the other side of the world's positioning itself for a $10 trillion market, 10 times as big in 2050. So something to think about as we all lean into this at the start of this next generation of explosive growth, using CAGRs based on our sort of past growth and what we've seen the last couple of years. And are we really just going to move that much, or is this more like the start of the internet in terms of what we're about to experience in space over the next few years? So either way, tremendous growth. We talk about this growth in our community in terms of waves. And each of the waves of growth starts with government activity, secure government activity that gives us a footprint in a new technology area or a new operating area or a new mission area, which is usually followed by business-to-business activity, which causes the next generation of growth, and then maybe eventually business-to-consumer activity, which causes explosive growth at the end of the market. So in our business, the three business areas I described, we feel that every day in our business as we look at the pipelines and the activities that we're working on. The first wave of explosive growth is in satellite-based communications and our satellite systems business. So it's had its history that you're all a part of, you all understand this, in terms of like government-based activity that then turned into business-to-business as we went through phases of broadcast and other, that is now getting in the business-to-consumer phase of more explosive growth as we now look at LEO constellations, broadband, space-based internet communications, Internet of Things, and the like in our sector. With that explosive consumer tail comes, tremendous amounts of growth that we're feeling in the business and that we get to experience every day. In Earth observation, the other business area that we're a part of, you can feel how that second wave is coming behind. It's still anchored in large government-based programs, large government-based business activities, and all the big announcements have to do typically with Earth observation contracts for intelligence, for defense and intelligence customers around the world. As we all deliver, those of us that are part of that, we all deliver on that anchor phase of growth. And we all dabble at looking at what that next wave is, that next phase of the wave is going to look like in terms of business to business, Earth observation delivery, and then someday maybe business to consumer, much more explosive growth. But we're still all waiting for that to come. Everybody's got their little sort of $10 million of commercial activity business in data or analytics into the more consumer market or the business market, looking for that next phase of the boom. And then the third wave that come will be for us, the space exploration or space infrastructure market, whereby we've got a history of 40-odd years of government-based anchor customer activity, but now that broke us into space infrastructure in low Earth orbit, around the space station and the like. Now feeling how that is starting to be able to transition in terms of business to business, as now we start to see commercial space stations emerging and other business activities in LEO, while the government programs take us into deeper space, heading towards the moon and into more cislunar market environments out in the lunar activity. So that's the third wave as it emerges, which will eventually will have potentially its consumer exploration, consumer expansion at the end of that period of time. As we're doing these things, it's interesting to me that as you go to transition from government to commercial, there's a militarization element that's occurring right now in the current activity, whereby the dual use aspect of our technologies are starting to be picked up in military applications, which is trying to transition and fuel the transition from government through military expansion into commercial activity. We see this in communications. We're seeing it specifically we see it in communications these days in our business in terms of our ability to leverage technologies that we're developing for commercial customers into now military customers that care about commercial activity. An example of that would be our satellite systems teams, all the work they've done on OneWeb in the last few years, bringing in advanced manufacturing, additive manufacturing, decreasing the number of parts in satellite technologies, increasing the use of robotics for assembly and testing, to be able to deliver high volume LEO products at high levels of quality at lower cost. Once that machine is set up in response to the larger commercial LEO constellations, we're then seeing the military programs be able to pick that up and take advantage of it, such as the opportunities to now deliver into the SDA community and all of those programs here in the U.S. as part of the U.S. DoD efforts. We're seeing the same thing in Earth observation as a result of Ukraine, whereby we've been busy operating, Earth observation satellites and capabilities, and then with the Ukraine crisis gave the opportunity for a bit of communication services, but certainly a lot of EO services to provide the information that was needed to be able to make the Ukraine conflict play out in a slightly more advantageous way for Ukraine. That's caused a number of other countries to pick up on what kind of services can we now lever from this commercial capacity to support military operations. That's bringing in all sorts of new conversations for us in the market that we're now a part of, whereby we start to see things such as speeches in the United Nations by members of the Russian community talking about commercial satellites that are providing data into Ukraine are now legitimate military targets. And therefore, industry now needs to work much closer with home militaries to talk about protection of assets and domestic assets, which is changing conversations about sovereignty. And what does it mean to have sovereignty in space? And how does industry and their governments collaborate to be able to have joint capability that is protected and secured for future operations? So as we're expanding this market and the military is adding to the fuel in terms of leveraging commercial capability, we're entering these new dialogues in terms of trying to shape and configure what the next generation of our relationship with governments will look like. In the space exploration business, with space infrastructure, that'll be another interesting dynamic to come in the future, as commercial space stations and commercial spacecraft doing servicing or assembly or manufacturing are asked to support the odd military activity and then go back to their commercial activities. This new dynamic will come into our business relationships, it feels, in the conversations certainly that we see as we are moving forward into the future. With this growth then, this military activity driving on top of this core government activity, taking us into greater commercial activity, certainly commercialization is fueling the last phase of that explosiveness of growth. Industry's ability now to collect the investments that we're all working on in the room, bringing that to the market, and be able to accelerate both the volume of capability and the pace of capability that's being introduced to the market is real. We're all experiencing it. We can feel the intensity of the meetings that we have this week. We feel it at work every day in our pipelines and the opportunities that we're working through. The volume of them and the pace of them as a result of commercialization is definitely increasing, driving the growth that's causing us to have to hire 1,500 people in 18 months. For us, it's really exciting. We get to have new commercial customers all around the world popping up, working with companies like Astroscale and active debris removal, or Intuitive Machines, delivering them lunar landing sensors that they'll get to take out for a spin as they go through 2023. Our relationships with Axiom, delivering commercial space robotics technologies into Axiom over the last little while. Working with some high-resolution Earth observation optical imagery businesses to be able to use our heritage to help them in their startup to be able to have the mission systems and technologies that they need to make their mission work. Our satellite systems teams working with companies like Sierra Space to deliver communication systems for Dream Chaser, or all the various commercial LEO constellation teams that the satellite systems gang gets to work with these days. So there's this broader range of commercial partners that's opening up is very real, and it's extremely exciting. The ability to respond to that growth is further accelerated by the ability to combine folks like us with the next generation coming up that's fueled by investment capital. We've been able to advantage our relationships with commercial industry to deliver new capability in a number of areas. And things like Earth observation on our Chorus constellation. We're using our capability to deliver or to put up our broad area surveillance C-band synthetic aperture radar, but partner with companies like ICEYE, leveraging their investment in new capabilities to pick up X-band satellites from them to create a constellation combining our capabilities and theirs to deliver faster, greater capability to the market by combining kind of the old space crowd and the new space crowd, which is kind of fun. On our work with Globalstar, delivering standing up now as sort of satellite prime and delivering into Globalstar their next generation for their constellations, working with Rocket Labs as our partner for the bus, the spacecraft platform, has been an excellent relationship in terms of accelerating our capability there to deliver a fast, high-quality opportunity into the market, and a range of new partners on the digital satellite side to be able to have the digital capabilities that we'll need with speed for the next generation of digital reconfigurable satellites for the market. So it's really exciting to be able to leverage the commercial relationships that we're seeing in the market and leveraging the investment of others. And that happens at a smaller scale with smaller startups, in addition to the much bigger companies trying to behave in a new commercial way. Last year, we announced a relationship with Lockheed Martin and General Motors, working together to be able to look at lunar mobility, rover capability for the moon, to be able to invest in that, deliver it, maybe offer it as a service. We're in a relationship with established space companies in Europe to look at the communication networks for the moon, again, to develop those and deliver them, and deliver that as a service. So these commercial relationships allow us to accelerate our capability and open up new opportunities for the market as we move forward into the future. It's pretty exciting. I'm sure Lori will talk about that a little bit when she's up here next. She's always good at talking about that. So we've had this. We're definitely a good example of a company that is experiencing the benefits of these waves of growth and being able to ride now the commercialization at the end of the tail of these waves as they kick in, and feeling ourselves pick up more commercial customers, more commercial partners to be able to take off into this next phase of growth. As we transition from phases where we have this anchor government world accelerated through military relationships into a broader commercial world, and then leveraging these commercial relationships to expand further into the future. As we do that, the real question is, are we going after a $1 trillion market or a $10 trillion market? As I mentioned at the start, we'll see as we go forward, but it's a pretty exciting run and very exciting to be a part of. Thanks a lot for your time today. Hope you enjoy our keynote speaker, Lori, coming up next. Thanks a lot.
All right, our thanks to Mike Greenlee and his team at MDA for their continued participation and support of Satellite. MDA is a company that is certainly growing. Mike was telling me beforehand that they had hired 1,500 people in the last 18 months. It's pretty impressive, especially considering the pandemic. But that's also why our community is growing so much here at Satellite. So thank you so much, MDA, for your support. Before we move on, I want to remind you that all of you that today's program also includes a closing keynote, which is presented by Illyria, the Google spin-off space and satellite company, which is making its big debut here at Satellite 2023. So join us right here in the same room at 4:30 p.m. for revolutionizing all-domain mesh networks at planetary scale with Illyria co-founders CEO Chris Taylor and CTO Brian Barrett, for a special keynote that includes the very first public demonstration of Illyria's space-time platform. This is open to all attendees and is followed by our welcome reception this evening at 5:30 p.m., sponsored by Amazon Project Kuiper. So lots to do for everybody today on this exciting first day. The excitement continues now with our next special guest luncheon keynote speaker, former NASA Deputy Administrator and Operating Advisor and author, Lori Garver. She will sit down for a fireside chat with one of the most brilliant and talented investors in our community, Tess Hatch, a partner at Bessemer Ventures. Tess serves and has served on the board of several companies and has partnered previously with companies like Rocket Lab and Spire. She was included in Forbes 30 Under 30 in venture capital and is published regularly in Bloomberg, TechCrunch, and other publications on space and frontier technology. I will now turn things over to Tess to welcome today's featured guest keynote speaker. Please give a warm welcome to Tess Hatch and Lori Garver.
Hello. Good afternoon. The theme for this conversation today is one ecosystem and how and why the government and the private sector will work together and invest in the space economy to seed opportunities. And we have the expert and inventor in this idea, Lori Garver. Honorable Lori Garver is a leading figure in the US space program. She was the Deputy Administrator of NASA, as Jeff said, and the leader of the agency's transition team for President-elect Obama. Lori, you have a long list of amazing accomplishments, but I'm going to list a few. You were awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award from Women in Aerospace. You're a senior fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, former board member of Maxar, and current board member of Hydrosat, and you co-founded the Brooke Owens Fellowship. It's an educational organization providing internships and mentorship to collegiate women and gender minorities pursuing degrees in aerospace fields. Wow. Lastly, you just wrote a memoir, Escaping Gravity, My Quest to Transform NASA and Launch a New Space Age, which I am looking forward to discussing today. And for folks in the audience, if you want a local shop to purchase signed copies of that book, check out East City Books on Capitol Hill. Okay, I'm really honored and excited to have this conversation with you. We're going to break it apart, the past, the present, and the future, and lots of fun in between. So jumping into low Earth orbit, the past. I first want to say your book really is fascinating, and it shines a light on how different things were when the government really was vertically integrated. It designed, built, tested, and launched everything. And today, with these private-public partnerships, partnering with commercial companies, and how that transition came to fruition, which you led. How did you come up with this idea for the government to work with commercial entities?
Well, thank you, Tess. It is great to be here and with all of you. You did not mention I'm an operating advisor to Bessemer Venture Partners. That's how I know Tess, and it's so fun to hear you say those things and recognize you are, relative to me, new to the industry. I did not come up with these ideas. I did not create commercial space. Of course, this has a long history, and one of the reasons I wrote the book was because there are so many people in this field now who it's not known to them that it was a struggle to get here in order to get the government to see that this is a real partnership with the private sector. It always has been, because at least in the civil space world, the early space program, yes, NASA set the architecture, but competed which companies would build. So these are really sort of buy-build decisions. And when I came into NASA the second time, it was very clearly an idea whose time had come. I was at NASA in the 1990s. Dan Golden, as I say in the book, was the head of NASA, and we always envisioned the replacement for the shuttle being a private sector-owned vehicle that the government would use. He started a program or two called X-33 and X-34 to be a technology development program that would allow for this to happen. We looked into and never got really the approval to do things like government guaranteed loans to incentivize the private sector. But when the bubble burst in 2000, 2001, there was no more market for the launch company beyond government. And so we constricted inward. And by 2008, when I was coming back into NASA, it was clear that the shuttle replacement needed to be privately built and owned and operated, and the government should just be customer. I say it was obvious to me. It was obvious to quite a few people, but not to the people who wanted to and had contracts to do the follow-on vehicles themselves in a cost-plus contract. So to me, the market drove this really quest that we all now share to lower the cost of space transportation. You know, that was the holy grail for my whole 40-year career in space. And if we could lower the cost and get that barrier to entry to be something that more companies could then invest in to find useful things to do in low Earth orbit, that was going to benefit everyone. So it is a really simple concept. It shouldn't have taken so long. But if you think about it, even once we had those policies lined up, so far SpaceX has been by far the most successful company able to do this. So we say, oh, it was obvious. Anyone who was out to really compete and lower the cost was going to succeed. But a lot of companies have tried. And so we got to give all props to SpaceX for making that happen.
Absolutely. So the motivation of lowering the barrier of entry, lowering the cost, how did you set it up for success such that it wasn't competitive, but it was collaborative? The companies, the private companies that are lowering the barrier, lowering the cost, were collaborating rather than competing with the government.
Well, that I wish I had done better, frankly. I think part of the problem was those companies, when we came in to do this in 08 and 09, that had the existing business, of course, they didn't want to loosen their grip. They didn't want to have to compete. So really sharing the fact that we would have the ability to lower the government's investment to be able to do this is, you know, was something that not everyone wanted to do, but I think it has, of course, shown already that it paid off. I think the investment just in the commercial crew elements of space transportation saved the United States government $20 billion. So, you know, these are not things that are really debatable as to whether they should be done, but it was not obvious that they weren't in competition. I tell this story in the book at one point being at NASA when I think it was the day Elon had announced the Heavy, that he was developing it. And the NASA team at Marshall said, Lori, you have to tell him no, we'll give him Leo, but we do the big rockets. We do the big rockets. Oh my gosh. So fundamentally, you know, this is not a competition between the government and the private sector. We're not in separate swim lanes. I said, think about it like you're in a peloton, you know, you're in a cycling race and the government's out front. And, you know, we're letting companies draft behind us and have an easier ride. And in fact, if they can take another hill, we don't, when they're passing us, get out our tire pump and jam it in their spokes. We take a different hill. We take the next hill. And as I say in the book, I don't think cycling's that big in the South. Where I was making this case, they didn't want to hear it right then. And, you know, we still have SLS, so they wanted their own big rocket.
That would have been a very interesting conversation and a very interesting future we'd all be sitting in today if that had come to fruition, if Falcon Heavy and now Starship weren't a reality.
Well, SpaceX was going to invest in those on their own. So I think it was really a question of, was the U.S. government, should we be competing with them? Because by building our own, to me, I felt we were undercutting their market. Both Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk had said early on they were going to build a larger rocket, But of course, this was hard to just take at face value. And this was before Falcon 9 had had the success it has. So I think, fair enough, the government decided we have a need, we're going to build it ourselves. And unbelievably, actually, both Bezos and Musk have invested. They haven't flown yet, in the case of Starship or New Glenn, in big rockets on their own that, if they're successful, will in fact make the governments obsolete, but that's yet to play out, really.
Yeah. So last question from the past before we hypersonically travel to today. Puns intended. I'll try some more. If I get some giggles. No laughs. Thanks, Lori. So writing your book, what were things we did right? What were things we did wrong along the way? What was something, we wish we did differently? Something you wish you did differently?
Well, I just said a big one. I think we were never able to fully convey how this was not a competition, that this would make the aerospace industry better. And the hardest thing for me was being attacked as somebody who's trying to hurt the nation's space program, when I very much intentionally was to try to make it better. For so long, we'd had things that we wanted to do in space, but we couldn't afford to launch them. And I've never been the person that was all about the rocket. It's like, let's get that done without having to spend so much of the government's money to do that. The value are the things that you can do once you get there. But I think, as I outlined in the book, a lot of the reasons that we didn't make that case as well as I think, could have in the early days. But it did get adopted. And I think one of the things that worked was, it's not something I should get credit for, but again, SpaceX, and in fact, NASA before I got back, so in between when I was there in the 90s through 2001, and when I came back in 2008, Mike Griffin's NASA had started the COTS program. So the ability to have vehicles dock with a space station with cargo, let NASA get comfortable with this concept that we don't have to design and build everything, that the private sector can do this. Because you can imagine at first, quite skeptical, these things are not simple. And I could see the acceptance and really ultimately admiration that the government people had for the companies that were able, and mainly SpaceX, to produce and be successful at a lot less money. And I think it was a wonderful thing to see people start to buy in and then help make it happen.
Wonderful. So going from Leo to Mio, the present today, and I have more questions for Lori, but the audience, we're going to open it up. So please start thinking of your question for Lori. There will be time at the end, and I think a microphone in the middle to go to. Or there's a few, I think, ones right there that you can go to for a question for Lori. Lori, today, 2023, what should the government do, and what should commercial companies do today in this current space economy?
I don't think these decisions are that hard. I mean, the government isn't set up to do the same things as the private sector, and we in this country have decided, the government is there both, I think, as a backstop and, in NASA's case, investing in those longer-term technologies, which right now are not something that are going to be profitable. There's not an immediate market. And so to me, there are so many of those things for the government to do. Why would we keep trying to compete on those things where there is a market for? But we're a little confused about this, I think. There's a lot of things that NASA is now enamored with, the success of commercial cargo and crew, extending that to low Earth orbit commercial destinations, which I think is a great use of a public-private partnership. And I think that program, we can look to great things in the future. Going out to the moon and Mars beyond, I'm less bullish on the private market in the immediate future. Mm-hmm. But we do have this, I think, you can't really say anything other than an enviable position of having wealthy individuals invest in companies who are willing to take a risk beyond what a publicly traded company is probably going to take to do things like build a lunar lander. And if this comes to pass and they are able to pull that off, of course more will follow, but I think they are really taking a step that we couldn't count on in the government or the private sector doing if we didn't have individuals with the wealth they have, they're willing to put at risk, because it fits into their long-term vision, obviously, of going to Mars.
Yeah. Your answer makes a good point in my question in terms of it's not just the government and private companies, it's the government, publicly traded space companies and privately held space companies and the quarterly shareholder reports versus the long-term investments, maybe not splitting it into these three: the government, public space companies, private space companies. And it sounds like government, invest in long-term ideas, go to the moon, go to Mars. Artemis, shout out, landing the first woman in person color on the surface of the moon is incredibly exciting and amazing that the government is going back. How can the government then support these two buckets for the initiatives they're doing today?
So they are doing that in the way of trying to select. They haven't been able to have the money to do 2 lunar landers, but if they get there, and the way they're doing it with Gateway, sort of trying to do fixed cost acquisition strategy, where I'm not sure, again, that without billionaire companies it would work, although Maxar here, where we are, MDA, formerly Maxar, does have a fixed cost gateway contract. So I think they are making a really good effort to do that. I think with the non-publicly traded companies, they can do more with incentivizing. They have an SBIR program, they could grow that. I would like to see some more incubation of these things at NASA within, I think, across the board, earth science, space science, aeronautics, probably more than human spaceflight even.
Wonderful. And maybe to play devil's advocate and flip it, we've been discussing all the ways the government can help private and space companies. Potentially one where it slows down is in regulation. The aerospace industry, we are no strangers to the 3-letter acronyms, or 4, I guess in ITAR's case, that I find have difficulty keeping up with the speed of technology that is going at Moore's Law pace. What can the government do to keep regulation up to date with the speed of technology that the startup companies and the public space companies in the audience are working towards?
Yeah, I think this is one of the key ways the government needs to help and do more. It doesn't come to NASA because we're not a regulatory agency. And it is pretty typical for technologies to advance our ability to set laws and govern activities going way back in history. But I've been involved in these discussions for 40 years. Orbital debris, you could have in these same issues, and I think for me, having been in government a couple times and being in the private sector, on the government side, things can really happen when you assign responsibility. Well, this is anywhere, really. Leadership 101. And we don't have always a clear responsible party. So you get commerce and transportation, the FCC, sort of each trying to do their own thing. And I think the executive branch or congressional, if they wanted to, could set the leadership roles better. So that it's very clear who has responsibility, set some timelines, and get it done. Of course, it's collaborative. We have to be doing this together. I think the Space Council could take leadership on this, and I believe right now we have, like when the FCC came out the other day and wanted to start regulating, and they had sort of I think it was a 5-year sunset on if you had a spent satellite that you had to deorbit. And then you had the other departments coming out, well, they're overstepping. It's like, okay, overstepping, we need to fix it. So let's maybe not argue about who does it and try and get in line.
Wonderful. Now MEO to GEO, the future. Maybe I should have flipped the order. Leo shouldn't have been the past. Leo should have been the future.
It's all the future, baby. It's all the future.
It's all the future. And please start heading over to a mic if you have a question for Lori, because I only have a few questions left. I can keep asking questions for sure, but we'd love to hear from y'all. And the mics are now lit up. Lori, I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Okay.
If you had a crystal ball and were to make a prediction, and there were some things that were mentioned. You mentioned the International Space Station still doesn't have a replacement. Starship, Moon, and Mars. If you were to pick one or many, we'll listen. Tell us about the future of these. What do you think is going to happen?
I am very excited about all of those things. Hard to pick a favorite child, but I would say taking them like that, the follow-ons to space station, and I think there will be business for more than one, are the most near-term exciting thing to me. I think just having pharmaceutical companies being able to test and the amounts of money they invest can be something once we have a fully usable lab where researchers can go. I'm very excited about it. And I know sometimes we're moving on to Moon and Mars, but I think we lowered the cost of access to low Earth orbit in order to take a lot of value from that. And I'm excited about robotics as well as human-tended activities. But Starship, it's hard to know. Like, if that works as planned, as I say in the book, the game will change again. Hard to imagine, really, the scale of a Starship launching so often, being fully reusable. Announcement came out Friday. One of the companies I'm advising, K2 Space, building buses to go in Starship because we aren't even thinking if it's working and starts operating, how cheap we'll be able to build very large things. Mm-hmm. And then Moon Mars, I will say it is I was a kid when they first walked on the moon, Neil and Buzz, but I was a girl, so I wasn't very aware of it. And now I'm looking forward very much to that. You do have a question on that.
Wonderful. The name of the game will change again, lowering the barrier of entry further and lowering the cost. We'll take your question. I do want to share something, though, Neil and Buzz, of course. But our first American female astronaut, Sally Ride, attended the same childhood school I attended when she was a little girl. Years later, after she had been to space and back, she came to my school in LA and spoke. Oh. I remember seeing this brilliant lady on stage who had been to space, which inspired me to
share
study
Stanford
aerospace.
with her as well.
That as well. But imagine all of the girls. Brooke Owen Fellowship is inspiring and setting
and
up
we have
for
some
success
Brookies here today
to study aerospace. Yes.
Bob Cohen.
Tess, Lori, thank you for the great panel. Bob Cohn with Strategic Decisions Group. Lori, I'm a big fan, you know that. I really appreciate today when I look back on, going back to COTS, to all the other acronyms that start with C, all the way up to the Lunar Eclipse program today, and frankly, even beyond that, to the Capstone mission that's flying around the moon right now. My question to you is, although I'm sure you're reticent to criticize anyone at NASA these days, is there an area of activity, technology, integration that you think is not adequately being looked at and should have maybe a slightly brighter spotlight shined on it?
Oh, Bob, that is a great question. I love that someone might think I was reticent to criticize NASA. That's a great thing. Because I feel like I've been a little too critical of NASA, perhaps. And it's only because I have said this lots of times, like, if you really love someone and yet they have a problem, you work toward helping them be even better, right? And I think NASA is doing a good job on a lot of fronts with this, and human spaceflight in particular, but I would like to see NASA start to get ready for a Starship era, and I don't think they're doing that. I mean, what would it take? How many Webb telescopes could we do for so much less money, and what kinds of things would opening up that aperture have? Why wait? it's not going to take a lot of money. I think there's a lot of things like that. I also think they should be looking at sustainability of rockets and green fuels, certainly in aviation as well. The future, NASA's all about the future, and we've got to learn to protect it better. And NASA's role in earth sciences has been so important. They should take more credit for that, and I think be doing more to help utilize our capabilities from the unique aspect of space to address what's happening on our planet today. There's a lot of private companies doing it. You look at something like methane sat and so forth, because they feel they can do it quicker than the government. But the government has capability to do it, and they could even just do data buys to really accelerate some of that investment, I think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Hi, I'm Alice Wade with the Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. Thank you for the great talk. So what I wanted to ask is, looking into the future, as somebody who's seen sort of the history and the current state of things in the space industry, what is your biggest concern, regulatory or otherwise, when it comes to how rapidly all of these new developments are happening? Yeah.
Yeah, there is a lot of concern, and I do share it, related to orbital debris and the future of the regulatory environment. What are we going to do there? But I also think there is a real concern about the long-term markets, and how are we going to, on the government side, invest in those things that really do have a payoff that benefit us here on Earth. I think a lot of times, NASA's a very future-looking organization. It gets a little fixated on a couple of astronauts doing something versus the other 8 billion of us. And one of the reasons I call the book Escaping Gravity, because if you think about how hard it is to escape our gravity well of Earth, we were able to accomplish it by aligning that goal through some brilliant, many people with an aligned goal. And I think the real challenge for us today is aligning behind something that will drive us to make those next leaps. We need to be able to sustain life here on Earth. And I truly believe that the perspective from space and our ability to measure what is happening here has allowed us to even understand the problem and offers solutions. In my generation, we sort of found the ozone hole, and that was not NASA that did that, but the telescopes in Antarctica that did it. But NASA scientists helped come up with the solution and immediately got through the regulatory to no longer have chlorofluorocarbons. And it changed. People couldn't believe that we could do something like that. And those things are still happening, and I think NASA could play a role. It's the most, it's a brand that is not only recognized, but revered around the world. If you test the imagery of Earth, people trust it. That's one of the things we need today, is a trusted source of information. And I love that NASA can be that for all of us.
Hello, my name is Jacqueline Good. I'm from Magnastar. Thank you so much, Tess and Lori, for the talk. Lori, given your position now at Bessemer, I'm curious, if you were to build a company today, what company would that be?
Oh gosh, if I had such an idea, I'm not sure I'd share it. But I think it probably would be related to remotely sensing the environment on Earth. But it might even just be the data analytics portion of it. Because to me, there's a lot of data that is underutilized. And I think the government is, again, very similar to how I see them on the regulatory side, having too many people thinking they're in the lead. Data utilization in the government is very diffuse, and it's in pockets. And I think we could really use a lead that is sharing this information. I know from being on the Maxar board that they're selling to customers. I'm sure they'd like to sell to a lot of the government customers that same information. But as a government, I think they're unaware of just how good this data is. And a company that could help make that connection, I think, would be a big success.
Thank you.
It's like the spotlight there.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, Tess. Hi, Lori. Thanks for being here today. My name is Kate. I am unaffiliated, and Lori, this question is for you. Throughout your career, all entities of it, I guess, what is your favorite word that gets you like excited or makes you laugh, and why?
Word?
Correct.
Fascinating. When something is fascinating, I want to hear about it. All aspects of it. And I have found in every job I've had, there are fascinating things to discover.
Well, I think that is a wonderful word to end this panel. Lori, this was such a fascinating conversation. Thank you for sharing it with all of us. Yes, you have a minute left, but please, we'd love to hear your question. Hopefully it's
Hello,
fascinating.
Leo Riera, board member of Biospace. I have a question for you since you are such a visionary. Maybe everybody in this room is thinking about launching satellites and taking them up there. I think to the pace of 100,000 satellites in the next 10 years. Do you have any idea, or can you speculate about a business model for how we're going to clean up the space debris?
Well, that was one of the challenges I mentioned that's most important. There's a number of very creative technical solutions, all the way, from magnets to nets. Regulatory environment is obviously critical, and being able to set up a regime that, at least for new things that are being launched, they will have requirements about their end of use life. But I think, again, really there's a need for some leadership to set a market for it. I think government could do that. I've thought there could be a COTS-like competition and say, we'll pay for whoever is cleaning up X number, of debris. That was the initial idea of delivering cargo to space station, just like an anchor tenant will pay for it. And it's something we have the capability to do. I don't think the technical solutions are insurmountable. It's a question of incentivizing those, and I think that, as with anything with space, it's a global issue. So here I am saying, oh, NASA, US government, we can do these things. It needs to happen in a global way, and we aren't great at governing regimes that set laws for people of all nations. But this is one where we obviously have a unique universal interest, and yet it is fraught because we have anti-satellite weapons. We have all kinds of things up there that are really, really valuable. And if the US government, I think, does take a lead, it would go a long ways. It's not a reason to not do it, for sure.
Well, we are officially out of time. Lori, thank you so much for joining us today. Always learn so much from you. Please join me in thanking Lori Garver.
Well, thank you both, Tess and Lori, for a fantastic interview. And also thanks once again to MDA and MDA CEO Mike Greenlee for sponsoring today's keynote. And thank all of you for joining us here. Join us back here at 4:30 p.m. For our closing keynote, followed by our welcome reception right next door at 5:30 p.m. We hope you enjoy the rest of the program today and the rest of your week here at Satellite 2023. Thank you all so much.